Thank you. I want to add my voice to the one you've already heard, and to thank you for your time and your attention this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm going to do a couple things for you today. Primarily, I'm going to describe the threat/risk landscape. And this presentation, like virtually every presentation I do, has three parts to it. It's basically where is the risk-threat landscape today. In this case, we're calling it keeping up with the bad guys. What are they capable of? And we're going to talk about a little bit about the evolution of that threat landscape. I want to talk a little bit about what that means to you, how you should interpret that, where you are positioned, I'll use the word competitively, with those individuals. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about what Semantic and, frankly, where we need to be to deal with those respective issues. So next slide, please. I need to give you a disclaimer. I've been trying to load a Java piece all morning long. It's just not working. So I've got my able-bodied assistant flipping slides for me. So here's a very general, a 50,000-foot view of the evolving threat landscape. And let me stop and say that all of these slides, all of this material, as far as the metrics are concerned, is available in a document that we produce every year. This one is called the Internet Security Threat Report. It's for 2015. It's about what we saw in 2014. So I'm going to use that document as my documentation for almost, I'll say 90% of the metrics that I use. And if you'd like to get your hands on it, you can pull that down off our website at Semantic.com. But this slide begins to give you a sense of not only where the bad guys are, but what their investment is. Obviously, the attack vectors are moving much faster. Their targets themselves, 5 out of 6 large companies are being attacked in one form or another. We're seeing 1 million new threats every day. That should tell you non-verbally that traditional scanning technologies, like keeping your virus definitions up to date, simply won't do it anymore. The critical piece, at least the most critical piece for me, is that box in the lower left-hand corner, the one that talks about 24 zero-day attacks being discovered last year. That is significantly higher than the year before. I think the year before it was like 13. And what that tells us is that the bad guys are putting a lot of time, energy, and effort into their research and development to find these things. The truth is there are lots of zero-day attacks that yet to have been exploited. Frankly, they're a little difficult to know if they've been exploited or not, or even if they exist. You notice the other metric there says that the top 5 went 295 days unpatched. That means we, the industry, or whoever, didn't know about them for quite some time, or at least they weren't responded to. But the whole point is the bad guys are putting lots of time, energy, and effort into finding these zero-day exploits. And there's a whole series of papers and that kind of stuff on the black market and how you, if you choose to, could get in this business very, very quickly and buy. I mean, there's an inventory of previously undiscovered zero-day exploits. I use that all to say the bad guys are becoming more and more serious about the value proposition of these zero-day exploits, putting lots of money into it because their return on their investment is monstrous. I throw all this out to say everything that we have said in the past, or everything that we have considered in the past as far as where malware is now moving at almost a logarithmic rate up and to the right. It's becoming very, very consequential. The next slide is sort of an overview of where we see the enterprise security market. Yes, there is an evolving threat landscape. What we're seeing is that data and the analytics of that data, and I'm not talking about data that's being stored, I'm talking about data about the attacks themselves, is becoming more and more critical. Being able to analyze how this stuff works, why it works, where it works, is not just a simple one-off of, hey, I'm getting an alert from my antiviral technologies. Obviously, because of the way we're doing business now, there's a resurgence to the endpoint. And perhaps maybe the most critical piece on this slide is those 3 little digits on the second bar down that says IoT. The Internet of Things is going to cause a fundamental shift or a fundamental change about how we consider doing business in general. The sheer volume of data, structured and unstructured, that's going to be generated is going to cause us to rethink not only data storage, but data compliance, and most importantly, data security. If you think about all the metrics or all the devices that are being developed these days to exploit the Internet of Things or to derive telemetry from your refrigerator and your car and everything else, the time to market to be profitable, the go-to-market strategy, and the time for production, those windows are so small that, frankly, security is almost an afterthought. What I'm suggesting is that as we get more and more production in that particular space, the data that's being generated by those devices are going to have less and less or weaker and weaker on-device security. So as the Internet of Things rears its ugly head, we need to consider what the security parameters are. The increasing cloud adoption. I'm getting away from SaaS, from infrastructure as a service, from storage as a service. I'm getting away from all of that. I think it now needs to, all the monikers need to read EAAS, that is everything as a service. Before too much longer, virtually everything is going to be available via the cloud if it's not already. The fourth point there, lack of security skills. There's a concept that I call infrastructure strain. And infrastructure strain comes as a result of your environment, and I don't know who you are, but I'm going to speak to you personally right now, and I will suggest I'm 99% correct to everybody who's listening to my voice. For the last X number of years, you have been imposed upon by the fine folks upstairs with an axiom or a moniker that says, this year we will do more with less. Let's squeeze more out of IT, more efficiencies, more effectiveness. Consequently, infrastructure is now dated, or at least infrastructure is becoming more and more behind the times, and infrastructure as a general sense, as hardware platforms, are running slightly behind the abilities to process some of this stuff. But my best illustration of infrastructure strain comes as a result of a conversation between the CEO and the CFO. The CFO walks into the CEO's office one day and says, hey, what if we invest heavily in our IT staff and they leave? And the CEO thinks for a minute and says, what if we don't and they stay? That's just an illustration to say, hey, today, one of the biggest shortcomings, and I don't mean to downsize or downplay the significance of IT or IT staffing by any stretch of imagination, because IT has so much to do keeping up with what the technical relevance is, or the technical requirements to understand the security space, is becoming more and more and more difficult. Consequently, we're seeing this general lack of security skills and growth of security as a service rising. And then obviously almost every day there's another news article about some hack or crack cybersecurity side as far as governments, regulations, and those kinds of things. So those are the key trends reshaping the security market. If you go to the next slide, it's basically a general sense of where Semantic is today. And that's today, but to be perfectly honest, today doesn't count anymore. Today is yesterday's news. Yes, we've got spaces, we've got a place in endpoint security and data protection and email security and trust services and authentication, authorization, managed service, the whole bit. We got it. Now, right here is where I want to undercut your thoughts on Semantic and every other vendor. I want to kill a concept in your mind right now. Never, ever, ever, ever again in the security space listen to a vendor who comes in and uses the phrase, our technology is best of breed. I would like for you to remove the concept of best of breed as being a good thing in the security space from your mind. That's not to say our technologies, Semantic technologies, are not best of breed. They are, and I can argue that all day long. But the point is, buying stuff today in the security space because it's best of breed is an error. When I say best of breed, all of us mystically, magically, mentally move our minds to the upper right-hand quartile of a Gartner Group Magic Quadrant. Okay, That's fine, I suppose. But in order to put a product in the upper right-hand quartile of Gardner Group, we now have to speak in terms of speeds, feeds, bells, whistles, functional specifications, and bright and shiny objects. Today, as far as a standalone technology is concerned, as far as a best-of-breed, standalone, we occupy this particular space technology is concerned, it is so not about that anymore. Today, the kinds of malware, the kinds of attacks we're seeing is not about an individual technology protecting its space. Today, what we're seeing are groupings or integrated solutions understanding collaboratively or collectively what's going on as far as a bigger picture is concerned. Let's go to the next slide. Today, we think, Semantic thinks, that the delivery of knowledge, what actually is going on out there, what actually should we be looking for, what are the malicious threats that can potentially attack our customers, and what do they look like from sort of a global perspective? Let me give you a very quick illustration. One of my hobbies is I happen to be a beekeeper. I live in Southern California, and don't ask me how successful bees and droughts do not mix. But it's amazing. An individual bee all by itself is virtually a biologic automaton. There is no intelligence there whatsoever. You're never going to have a personal relationship with a bee. And even stinging is a knee-jerk reaction. But I can take that one bee and I can put it into a hive with 40,000 of her sisters, and there becomes collectively an amazing amount of intelligence. They know when the days are getting longer, and they stimulate the queen to lay more eggs because the honey flow is coming. They know when the days are getting shorter. They know winter's coming, so they stimulate her to lay less eggs. They know when they're overcrowded, and when they are, they generate a new queen cell, and when the new queen hatches, half, and I mean half, of the hive leaves with the old queen. The question is, which half? How do they know whether they should leave or stay? They know whether they should put on pollen, whether they should generate drones. They know. Here's my point. Today, security is exactly the same. No one piece of technology can understand this bigger picture. Today, there's a required feed. There's a knowledge component, an information component that has to sit behind all of the technology to interpret what it is we should be looking for. These 6 devices are only some of the methodologies we use to understand what's going on in the real world, and I frankly have a whole presentation on just these 6 to competitively differentiate ourselves, but I'm going to leave that alone. If you go to the next slide, what you'll see is Semantic tomorrow. I said from that earlier slide, Semantic today, we're uniquely positioned to do some very critical things, but we think tomorrow it's not going to be a happy day unless we change the way we go about doing security. And so what we're doing is recrafting ourselves or realigning ourselves into 4 major categories. One is about threat protection, understanding what's happening out there and what kind of protective technologies do we need to put in place and what sort of knowledge component or information do we need to put behind them. Secondly, we think today, as it has been for probably the last 2 years, it is not about infrastructure security. Today, it's about information security. If your mindset is still, if I keep my infrastructure secure, then I must be secure, you are woefully lacking. Gardner Group says that today, 71% of a company's intellectual property is now found in email archives. 71% of the really business-critical stuff is no more attached to your infrastructure than that smartphone sitting on your desk. Today, we think the requirement is to protect data or to protect the information. Yes, you have to have technologies in place to protect the infrastructure. That's not ever going to go away. But the foci, the priority, has to be on the information, not the infrastructure. And so we're putting some things in place. I'll get a little more granular here before we're all finished. Sitting on top of that is the acknowledgement that indeed there is infrastructure strain. Indeed there is levels of expertise that perhaps IT does not have, and and there is a cybersecurity service portion of Semantic that, frankly, is not being built. It is built. We're going to be expanding it to do security for our customers at whatever level they would ask us to do, to participate with them, to augment what they're doing, or to do the security for their enterprise. Why? Because we're seeing this, if you will, this lack of expertise as becoming more and more and more problematic. And so we would very much like to be not just the trusted advisor, but the go-to person or the go-to entity to secure the environment. And then undergirding all of that is this knowledge component, this piece that can take all of these subsets, all this telemetry from all over the place, and describe what's actually going on, to run some analytics on this and come back with the actual story of what the threat looks like. So we're going to work through these sort of one at a time. The next slide is about threat protection, and it's an introductory slide. So I'm going to go to the next one that talks about the threat protection requirements, the full cycle protection. We see this advanced threat protection. I have to stop and pause and say I had an opportunity to be at the RSA this year, and everybody, virtually every vendor in the security space is talking about advanced threat protection. So for me to use that phrase is almost ridiculous. So let me talk about what we see advanced protection as being. It's technologies in place that can do a number of different things. One, could I run some proactive risk analytics? Could I understand ahead of time? Could I predict what the attacks are going to be? Could I run some baselines so I know when there is indeed some anomalies, when there have been some changes, and I know what those changes are, I can understand what those attacks might have been. Secondly, can I put some devices in place to prevent the attack from happening when it does? If I have, zero-day attacks sitting out there, zero-day attack vectors or possibilities, is there a way of hardening my systems so that those zero-day things are going to be virtually something I'll read about or hear about on the news? Is there the potential to get a little proactive as far as the attackers are concerned? Could I divert the attackers? Could I put a DMZ between the real world and my internal environment? Could I drop some honeypots in the middle of that and not just divert them from the sense of, they're not getting to my good stuff? But if I have some honeypots or I have some other devices in that DMZ, could I sit outside of those and run some analytics on the attack that's occurring there and understand not only who is attacking, from where are they attacking? All of a sudden, I can understand trusted sources and non-trusted sources. I could get skill sets. I could pull out their technical capabilities. Are we already looking at those technical capabilities to deal with those issues? We're seeing now an opportunity to get almost proactive with some of these telemetry generating devices and our ability to observe this stuff happening in real time. With that, I can prevent some issues. On the sort of the informational piece, can I go about detecting those? Can I confirm and prioritize what the risk might be? I have a question that I ask C-level folks all the time when they're in the executive briefing center, and that question is, have you had a breach? And the answer is, you know as well as I do, the answer is yes, because everybody's had one, including you. Everybody's had a breach. And frankly, the first question really doesn't count because the answer is yes, we have had a breach. The second question almost doesn't count. The question is, how do you know? How do you know if you've had a breach or not? How could I confirm whether or not I've had a breach? What are the indicators? All of that. But even that question really doesn't count. The critical question is, have you been compromised? Having a breach is one thing. Really, that's not a bad thing. But have I been compromised? Has our data left the building? Has our data been corrupted? Is there malicious stuff being stored on our environment to produce some future problematic experience for us? Today, we see the need to be able not only to detect the issues, but to understand indeed they are there and prioritize them, and frankly, to use them. And then obviously containment is a requirement. And then I got to clean up the mess. How do I go about responding to that? Well, I need to be able to remediate these issues when indeed they surface in whatever form they take, make the changes, and frankly, if I could do that with a high level of automation, so that at the end of the day, my IT staff gets a report that it indeed has been done, as opposed to being able, requiring them to manually do it by themselves. Do I need to redesign my environment? Do I need to modify it or change it so that indeed it becomes more and more stayed, tried, true? And then ultimately, I want to be able to pull information out of that attack so I can do forensics and become more and more knowledgeable about what those devices look like. That is, for us, advanced threat protection. If I can deliver into all four of those spaces, that kind of stuff, that is advanced threat protection. The next slide talks about the strategy here. It's about applying this advanced threat protection to all the control points in your environment, all of the endpoints. Remember my B illustration. I've got to be able to pick up this information, this telemetry, this part of the story from all of these different entities. In the next breath, I want to be able to build in the forensics and the remediation within each of those, so we can not only pull information from, but we can drive response back to. I want to be able to protect server workloads. If I can do all this without impacting production, life is very, very good. And then if I could manage this from anywhere, like through the cloud, so if I'm sitting in a Starbucks in, I don't know, Mountain View, California, could I manage all that, understand all that, respond to all that? We see that as being our deliverable. That's the goal for delivering against this threat protection piece. The next slide is just an introductory slide to the information protection. What does that look like? So let me go to the one after that. And if you go ahead and just build that out so all four quadrants are built in, that's fine. The three gray areas are kind of where we are. Lower left-hand corner, yes, historically data was created and consumed within the firewall. That's back when we were doing just bricks and mortar. Up above that, mobile devices and access applications, that's when the things moved outside. Now we're talking about smartphones and iPads and whatever happens to be. And then lower right-hand corner, everything moving up to the cloud. Okay, that's kind of cool. That we get that. The need for cloud computing is not just relevant, it's becoming a must-have. And let me kind of interrupt myself here. I don't know where cloud computing is in your thinking. Let me give you another metric just to bolster your, put another bullet in your gun if cloud compute, if they're resistant upstairs. Gartner also says that the average small to medium business, their data growth is today running at about 62% year over year. 62% year over year data growth. Let me tell you what that means. There's an axiom, there's an idiom within the investing real estate community called the Law of 72. The Law of 72 says you can take any growth percentile, like 62%, and divide it into the number 72, and the number that you get back is the amount of time it's going to take for the original number to double in size in years, given compounded interest. So let me change that ever so slightly to eliminate compounded interest. Let's take 50% growth percentile year over year and divide it into a bigger number, 75. 50 into 75, that's 1.5, that's 18 months. You're telling me that my data storage requirements are going to double over the next 18 months. Yes, I am, and considering the onset of the Internet of Things, that might be a conservative number. My point is this: if cloud computing is not now part of your thinking, it soon will be forced upon you. And I want to encourage you to start thinking in terms of what cloud computing means, frankly, what value cloud computing might be. But the point is, as we start moving things to the cloud, in order to protect all this stuff, there's going to need to be, rather than a separation of duty or a separation of technologies, we see the need for what we're going to basically call a cloud control point, something to protect the data in the cloud. And frankly, we also need to protect the data from the individuals that are in the cloud, which now talks about not only the security of the data, but authentication and authorization processes. Who has access to that data regardless of where it resides, and how do we go about allowing them to have access to it? That's a policy statement. We'll come back to that in just a second. So if you go to the next slide, the label that we're putting on this is Cloud Security Broker. We see the need to address data being stored in the cloud and securing that data as it's stored in the cloud. Then we see the need to put control parameters within your graph to determine who gets access to that data. Let me change that. How they would access that data and from where they would access that data. Let me give you an illustration. If I'm sitting with my iPad in a Starbucks in Dallas, Texas, I'm a completely different person. I'm a completely different entity than if I'm sitting with my laptop plugged in with a Cat5 cable at corporate headquarters. My security parameters would change. If I'm sitting with my iPad in a Starbucks in Shanghai, China, I might be a completely different security person or a security entity. I might have a different set of parameters. So it's not just about who is trying to get on, it's under what context that person is trying to get access to this data. And so if I can control the data, if I can secure the data, if I can qualify the data, I can determine what is important and what's not important. I can put policy upon that data per its classification and determine what does happen to it and what doesn't happen to it. Then, if I can do exactly the same thing to the people who are trying to access that data regarding who they are, that's authentication and authorization, and how they're trying to access it or from where they're trying to access it, that's context. What I've basically done is put a parameter, or put a, if you will, a bubble around this whole concept of my data, and I can protect the information as opposed to protecting the infrastructure. We see this cloud security broker as being a hypercritical deliverable, and frankly, it's got one of the higher priorities as far as our production cycles are concerned. If you go to the next slide, this is cybersecurity services. Okay, so that's the introductory slide. Go to the one after that, and just go ahead and let it build out. So all this stuff is pretty intense. All this stuff is, rather large and foreboding, and so what can Semantic do in this particular space? Well, again, I don't have the time within this presentation to address this, but it is indeed about our technology. It's about our back-end infrastructure that's all about collecting this telemetry. It's also, and let me stop right now and say, anybody can collect logs. Let me change that. Everybody collects logs. The real question is, how do you go about analyzing those logs? What kind of systems do you have in place to make it not only efficient and effective, but to squeeze out all the froth and get right down to the germinal stuff that's actually going on? So we see not only the collection of data as being important, I'm reading the far left-hand side here, but the analytic technologies are critically important. And then after the analytics have been run, how do I go about disseminating what is important and what's not important? I also have to be able to understand the people. I've got to be able to identify who they are, interpret what it is they're trying to accomplish, and manage all of that. If I can do both of those things, then I can dump it over into, or I am already, part of the security software services is understanding, what we need to be doing with the data and how do we go about doing that. So there are reactive portions to this, there are ongoing portions to this, and there are proactive portions to this. The reactive is all about incident response. Something bad happens, and let's just say the quiet part out loud. Security is an art form. It's not an exact science. The security space, there's a sort of a technical requirement for us to bat 1,000, to use a baseball illustration. But the truth is, we never bat 1,000. Come pretty close, but we never bat 1,000. The bad guys only have to bat 1. So the point is, when the incident happens, how problematic is it going to be? What are the response mechanisms in place? And we have a whole block of functionality that's built around responding to those incidents. That DMZ piece and the honeypots and all that, that's only part of it. Secondly, there's an ongoing, how do we keep the customer, how do we keep you as secure as possible? So there's a whole monitoring process going on to say, hey, this is where the customer is, this is what the risk landscape looks like around them, If those two things are pretty much in parallel with each other, life is good. And then, frankly, we try to keep looking ahead, so there's a whole series of proactive technologies that allow us to derive intelligence about where the bad guys are going. I want to quote Wayne Gretzky at this juncture: our job is to skate to where the puck is going to be. It's a terrible quote. I know it's pretty close to what he said, but you understand what I just said. It's not about where the puck is at. And then all of that fills down into, I'm going to call it an internal and an external education system. We see the need to start putting in front of our customers simulations of what we're seeing so that there can be an appreciation for what the threat landscape looks like. Help us understand, simulate for us the kinds of things we actually should be looking for. Now, we're doing that internally to a degree already. We're going to be doing more of that. But we're also going to start pushing that out. We think a rising tide lifts all boats, and to the degree we can start describing the threat landscape or the threat risk landscape for our customers, we'll be better off and our customers will be better off. And I don't mean to sell you here by any stretch of the imagination, but it's right here where we intend to competitively differentiate ourselves again from everybody playing in the space. We think if we can show you what we're capable of, if you can appreciate what we're capable of, if you can move along with this, you'll very quickly realize Semantic and the value proposition here. So if you go to the next slide, here's sort of the granular piece. This is the drill down into that cybersecurity stretch. So what's the need? Well, if it's all about monitoring threats and campaigns. We have a whole portion of our service in place today that does exactly that. Track and analyze key events and trends, and deliver threat analysis, deliver threat intelligence to wherever it needs to go. And by that I mean, if that's to our partners like Software One, if that's to us internally because we're doing it, or if that's to you because you're using our analytics or our intelligence as the back end and you want to respond to it, however you want that intelligence, that's the way you get it. That's existing today. Coming down the pipe, and we're talking probably within the next 18 months, this is all just sort of an extrapolation of all this stuff, we see the need to put in new response mechanisms. Let me change that. Automated response mechanisms that do incident response and forensics at almost exactly the same time. Not only what happened, but why did it happen, where did it come from, what does it mean, and how do we harden the environment? And then there's this security simulation service, so you can understand sort of where the environment is today and maybe, raise the level of appreciation of your staff and put them in a place where they can deal with some of these issues in the future. The next slide is the introductory slide to the Unified Security Analytics Platform. Pardon me. And I'll just skip past that and go to the one of the focus shifting on analytics. This is that intelligence piece. Now, this is that intelligence piece really on steroids. We see the need, let me change the word, an absolute requirement to start driving analytics. What's actually happening? If I'm just looking at a bee, I got nothing. If I'm looking at a beehive, I've got a lot. So as these attacks become more and more sophisticated, and I've already addressed some of these, the micro-targeting is almost a one-off of a person or the one-off of an individual company. This is not mass extermination as far as the bad guys are concerned. It's now being very, very, very focused. New techniques and zero-day attacks. I've already talked about their investment there. And stealth is one of their calling cards. One of the reasons we're seeing the need for this bigger picture, every piece of technology sort of driving its piece of the puzzle back into what we're calling a central point of truth, is because the bad guys are becoming very, very good at being stealthy. By that I mean they might put in portions of code that in and of themselves is not problematic and run that into your environment using a variety of vectors. And once it's inside your environment, then we're going to build this system inside your environment past at least all of the perimeter goings on. That's only one stealth methodology. They're using many, many others. What we're seeing is existing technologies are unable to keep up. We don't want to be reactive anymore because everything is moving too fast. There's what we're finding, frankly, and that's one of the driving forces behind this intelligence piece, is this inefficient data to find the subtle trends and patterns. What is needed now is this big global piece. And then isolated approaches, these one-offs, these individual technologies, these best-of-breed things dealing without an understanding of the broader context is not only dangerous, it's lethal. Because if the right hand don't get you, then the left one will, kind of thing, to quote, who was that? Tennessee Ernie Ford, one of those guys? And then to my earlier point, analyst fatigue is rampant. Too many alerts, too many false positives, slow and manual detection, it's all becoming more and more problematic. Consequently, we see an absolute requirement to deliver this big data analytics, unified analytics platform that basically can understand all this with a high level of automation and drive back the decision-making processes or the decisions that need to be made or the actions that need to be made. Let me add a word here. Drive back actionable intelligence, and if you'd like us to use that as a trigger to exercise that actionable intelligence, we can do that as well. The next slide is the security analytics, the unified security piece in a nutshell. What is it? Well, it's this big data analytics thing that's all about collecting all this telemetry. Secondly, it's about applications built by Semantic and third-party vendors for a variety of security use cases, and I'll show you a slide here in a second. It's obviously if I've got these analytics and the old technology is good, it's just not everything you need. We're going to need to be building some stuff to run on top of all that analytics. And then lastly, a standard set of interfaces where we can visually see what's going on, or we can respond to whatever mechanism is necessary. We see the need to build this thing out. The bottom four squares there is probably the most critical piece. What does it do? Well, it brings in all the events from all the sources, not just Semantic, but from all of the security vendors, all the security technologies, yes. But frankly, all the other technologies as well. The operating systems running on the endpoints have something to say. There are logs being generated there that we frankly need to look at. The network switches and routers and all of that stuff are generating stuff that perhaps is a part of this bigger story. Bring in the data from the events from all sources. Second, build out a platform that's designed to manage and analyze all of this stuff, to aggregate the data so we can understand, where is it, and then to exercise some intelligence against all of that, to root through all of the white noise and pull out from this central point of truth. I'm going to come back to that a couple more times. What's actually happening inside the environment as a result of what's happening outside the environment, and then create this cycle of data platform and ecosystem that basically feeds off of each other, that benefits from each other, that responds to and grows in value from a security perspective from each other. And then the last slide is, not the last slide, but the next slide is 4 of these applications that we're working on. I said we're working on some applications to deal with some of these things. Well, one is called SimGauge. It's basically a risk advisor. How problematic is this stuff? None of this is a 1 and a 0. It's not black and white. How problematic is this particular event going on? It can benchmark security health. Are we better today than we were yesterday? And we can come back and say, hey, there's all of this stuff that is good or isn't good, or worry about it or not worry about it. Incident investigation technologies to look at these incidents, to understand what's happening across all these attack points, and build out the full attack chain so we can understand exactly what the attack looked like, and then, frankly, push that information back so the intelligence continues to evolve with respect to where the bad guys are. As far as targeted attack detection, this is one of those places where we're actually thinking about taking some proactive steps against the bad guys. I'm not going to go into all this in great detail, but we see the ability to understand not only who they are, where they are, what they're coming from, run demographics on those, and continue to derive information about trusted and untrusted sites, trusted and untrusted individuals, trusted and untrusted stuff. We'll just leave that alone. And then a piece we're calling Moneyball. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Moneyball. It's the Oakland A's, and you use a computer for the first time to determine who should play who. The real question is, where do I get most bang for the buck? How do I go about understanding what the security issues are, how do I go about putting controls and policies in place, where do I best invest my security dollars? And the Moneyball piece is going to be designed to do precisely that. So let me stop and close with this. So hopefully what you've captured here, and frankly, this is true for me, the security space is well beyond anything at this juncture that I have previously had the capacity to grasp. I mean, I have a general sense of what's happening, but it is just all moving very, very, very quickly. And understanding this is not about insulated, isolated individuals or groups. This really is going to be a collaborative, collective group event to understand what's happening in the security space and the kinds of things we need to do collectively and collaboratively in order to resolve them. To quote Spock, I don't remember which movie it is. Perhaps one of those, you guys can throw that in. You know, when he's in the nuclear reactor, no, he's not. He's in there with the dilithium crystals, and he's all locked in and that kind of stuff. And his response back to Kirk was, hey, the pain of the one is for the gain of the many. And that's, frankly, what we see happening here. If we can capture information in your environment, if we can capture information in your environment about this particular attack, the rest of us can benefit. We'll go back to an ancient security idiom. This is back in the evolutionary days, back when there, you know, it's all about security in numbers, and numbers with respect to the amount of telemetry that's being developed and analyzed, with the amount of information that's being collated and analyzed, and all that information being pushed back out. It's all about security in numbers. He stops, he pauses, and says, it pains me to tell you, but I think I'm about 2 minutes early as far as my presentation is concerned. So let me stop right here and just throw it open. If there's any questions, I would be more than happy to respond to them.
Hey, Niels, we do have one question. Someone asks, will this threat and security product work as good as the backup exec product they currently use?
Okay, well, that's a different question. But let me throw this out. I think the first three words in any good security strategy has been, is today, and always will be backup, backup, and backup. To answer the question, no, because we have to bat 1,000 and the bad guys always have to bat 1. However, what's going on with backup exec really has very little to do with this technology. What's going on with backup exec is about, yes, backing that stuff up, but the truth is understanding this bigger picture of what's actually going on, interpreting the threats and responding to those threats is well beyond anything that backup exec in and of itself can do. Let me frankly say that backup exec and net backup both have critical pieces in this system. Both of them are capturing information. They're first and foremost can understand the anomalies between, you know, what happened on the last backup and this next backup. Are those legitimate? Because there's always going to be there. Are they legitimate? Are they illegitimate? And frankly, we're taking feeds from those. We're taking feeds from all the technology within in the environment. So, is it as good? No. Backup exec stuff, you got to do it, but you can't hang your hat on just solving the problem by taking backup after backup after backup. The bad guys will have your lunch.
All right, and we do have couple more questions actually. Do you think end users participating in simulated attacks to get experience will be a necessity in the future to effectively protect an organization's IT infrastructure?
Yeah, so let me stop and say that whole simulation piece is for IT. That's not to say that the end users couldn't be involved with it. Certainly I think it's important for the end user to have an appreciation for the part that they play in the security of your organization. However, end users, let me stop by here and qualify this statement. I like people. Some of my best friends, my dog notwithstanding, some of my best friends are people. I'm married to people. She's terrific. But all end users, by definition, are people. And people bring with them three strikes. 1, they're inefficient. 2, they're ineffective. And 3, they are error-prone. You can educate the end users until you're blue in the face. You can take your entire IT budget to educate your end users, to bring them up to appreciate what it means to be a part of the security, consortium inside your environment, and they're still going to make mistakes. Anything you can do to eliminate end-user decision-making processes from this equation will serve you well. There's nothing wrong with allowing them to participate in these simulations so they can get a sense of that story, a sense of the part they play, but you should in no way be dependent upon them, quote-unquote, doing the right thing. And that's not to say they're going to necessarily do anything malicious on purpose, but some of the best-intended, long-standing, staid, tried-and-true employees can make some rather egregious mistakes. So eliminating the end user from the equation is important as far as I'm concerned.
All right, and we have another question. We currently use Proofpoint and FireEye for email security. Does Semantic have a single consolidated offering as a SaaS solution?
So let me stop and say, depending on how you want it, do you want it local? Do you want it from the cloud? The answer is yes. Do you want it from both? Yes. But the truth is, those technologies are pretty good darn technologies, and frankly, we're going to take feeds from those technologies as well. If you're interested in some other stuff I don't mean to go salesy on you here, but if you want some other stuff that does, I need to be really careful what I'm about to say. Yes, to answer your question, yes, we do. But that's not to say that technology is not pretty darn good. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Let me also say that as we're building all this stuff out, our expectation is not that you're going to have to take all of your security technology and throw it out and replace it with stuff that comes in boxes that are yellow and black. Our intention is to work with the existing environment, the extant environment as it sits, and to pull from that environment and to deliver information back to that environment, information necessary for response. We have to acknowledge the fact, Semantic has to acknowledge the fact that we are not the only vendor in town, and we'd love to force you to buy all Semantic stuff, but that is absolutely not going to be a requirement.
All right, and then last question, someone wants to know, will they still need antivirus software?
Okay, so here's a news flash. Antivirus is not dead. I don't know who that guy was, but I want to see his laptop. I want to see his desktop to see if antivirus is running on that thing. Yes, you will. You need antivirus today. You're going to need antivirus tomorrow. But you cannot be dependent upon antivirus. Just because your virus steps are up to date doesn't mean you're secure. If you go back to an ancient adage, it's all about defense in depth. And antivirus plays an important part in that defense in depth. You pull the antivirus piece out, there will be portions that are lacking. Now, my friend, who will remain nameless, who says antivirus is dead. In that day, there may have been momentarily a technology that eliminates antivirus from the equation. That is not true today. And as the bad guys come to realize what is or isn't running inside an environment, if they know you're not running antivirus inside your environment, or antivirus starts, they will start developing technologies to exploit that. All I'm saying is you can't rest on the fact that you have antivirus running in your environment and you're secure. That is not true. In the next breath, you cannot not have it. Let me throw this one at you. The Internet Security Threat Report will tell you, I can't give you the number, but you can find it. Inside the Internet Security Threat Report, an amazing percentage of attacks, I want to think in the neighborhood of 50% of the attacks is now web-based. So it's got nothing to do with the operating system. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm running a Mac OS or a Windows-based OS, whatever it happens to be. The bad guys are moving around different security technologies in a way of, if you will, worming their way into your environment. So, yeah, antivirus, got to have it. Bill, and I acknowledge the fact I'm an antivirus vendor, but the truth is I'll never see a day when some technology, some of the engines aren't going to be hypercritical as far as securing that endpoint.